Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 292 of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Blooming with Lyme, an interview with Georgia Wood. My name is Matt Sabatello.
My name is Richard Johannesson.
We knew Georgia was going to be a great interview, but we had no idea she was going to be this amazing. If you're struggling and think your Lyme experience is unique and that you're not going to be able to get over this horrible disease, then this is the podcast episode for you. Georgia goes into great detail relating to our personal experiences and then providing specific ways to overcome these hurdles. George is brutally honest and describes the pain that too many of us know with chronic Lyme disease. An important message she wants you to know is that you're not going to stop growing as a result of this experience. So hang on, keep fighting, and don't give up. So without further ado, we're really excited to introduce Georgia Wood.
Hey, Georgia Wood, and welcome to the Tick Bootcamp podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Matt and Rich. I'm really appreciative to be on here and share my story.
And we're really excited to have you on our podcast. And we always like to interview our fellow podcasters. And we've been big fans of yours and your podcast for a long time. So you're really blessing us by taking time out of your very busy schedule and sharing your story with our community. So thank you so much, Georgia, for taking time out of your schedule.
Of course, anything to help the Lyme community.
Well, thank you. So, Georgia, talk to us first about where you are right now. I detect an accent, or maybe I have an accent, and because you speak English properly, I can detect a distinction between my diction and yours.
So I am currently in Woodstock, Vermont, in the USA. However, I was born and raised until around 13 in Down Under, so good old Australia. I moved to America when I was about 13, 14 for a skiing career. And I've been here ever since. So I'm going on to my 11th year right now, which is pretty exciting.
All right. Welcome to the immigrant community, Georgia Wood.
Thank you.
So, Georgia, talk to us about what it was like to grow up in Australia.
For me, it was really incredible. I just remember going to the beach every morning and not understanding how cool that was. I would just go to surf before school and then come back, and we were always very athletic in our family. So I started skiing pretty young, and a lot of people don't know that skiing is in Australia. However, it is. I was doing bunches of sports and happened to be pretty naturally good at skiing by the age of 10, 11. And so we started actually traveling to Canada on and off to make it a little bit more serious. And so I had a big upbringing of Canada and Australia, lots of travel, a lot of independence, very, very young. I actually traveled to Canada by myself from Australia when I was 11 years old. At that point, we didn't have Wi-Fi everywhere and we didn't have iPhones. So I had a very cool pink flip phone that I had to switch the US, Aussie SIM cards, all of that. So I was basically very independent at a young age, but absolutely had a good balance between Canada and Australia, beach and snow, but very athletic.
So this is something new for me because I did not know that you had snow in Australia. So you developed your passion for skiing when you were living down under, and to enhance that element of this passion, you were bouncing back and forth between Australia and Canada, which I guess Canada have the best snow and the best skiers. So you want to make sure that you could develop your skill set with the best and the brightest in the world.
Exactly. And actually just reminding me, classic Lyme brain, and we'll come in and out. But I will say, coming back to Australia very briefly, I was born obviously in Australia. And when I was born with actually a dysplastic kidney. So I came out with my immune system being very mucked up. I came into the world and was automatically in surgery, automatically on antibiotics, and for the first 3 years of my life on antibiotics. So my immune system never really had a chance to get set up. On top of that, the surgeon said there were two sports I would never be able to do in my life, and that would be skiing and skydiving. And I can say now that I successfully got onto the national team for skiing, and I have gone skydiving. It shows that I'm very much one to push my boundaries from quite a young age.
Well, we can tell already in this short time we've been together that you're not the kind of gal that somebody should tell you cannot do something.
Exactly.
So, Georgia, talk to us about what you knew about ticks and tick diseases when you were a young person in Australia. We've heard
absolutely nothing.
Yeah, we've heard from some of our Australian guests that that the official position of the Australian government is there is no Lyme disease in Australia.
And it is still that way today. There is absolutely no Lyme disease acknowledgement in Australia whatsoever. It is quite, I mean, it angers me deeply. I had no education on it whatsoever. I moved from Sydney, Australia, from living on the beach to Woodstock, Vermont. So it was a very big reality change. I had never heard about ticks, so I was outside in the grass in the woods, no long socks, no awareness, no nothing. And I honestly didn't know until I was probably about 17, 18.
Okay. So when you say you didn't know anything about ticks until you were 17 or 18 years old living in the US. And if that's when you learned about ticks, how did you learn about ticks?
I remember I think when I was, I guess I would probably be around 16, I went to Martha's Vineyard and my like high school boyfriend at the time had a tick, but we just took it off and that was that. There was no, this could be a lifelong thing. It was, oh, you got a tick, let's take it off and hope for the best. And that was just, it was kind of like in Australia getting a mosquito bite or a spider bite or any sort of bug bite in Australia. Oh, we got it, whatever, move on.
So your awareness came at a time where you did not think it was something that would be a threat and it wasn't something you should be protecting yourself against. It was just sort of one of these sort of nuisance bug bites that that you could easily deal with. And although it may be gross because it's sucking your blood, not a big deal.
Yeah. And especially me as an Australian, I really was like, oh, that's nothing. That's tiny. Like, I just really didn't pay any attention to it whatsoever.
So Georgia, you said that you were a gifted elite athlete. What was your vision for your future while you were pursuing this sort of international pursuit of skiing?
So I've always been a very driven human, and especially I think with my illnesses throughout my entire life, I have been in and out of hospitals. And I always sort of pushed through, and with skiing, I somehow had a natural ability with it. And throughout most of my skiing career, I still had kidney issues. Even when I moved to the US, I remember I actually had a kidney reconstruction when I was 14 years old. And 3 weeks later, I was on snow doing backflips. So with my like elite skiing, it was absolutely incredible. The mental drive, mind over matter, let's go, let's go. But it definitely did confuse me as a young human of when to say my boundary, like, no, I need to rest. No, I actually am feeling at a point of not being okay. So I really lost my sense of this is a real pain I'm feeling, because I pretty much had a kidney reconstruction, went skiing on 3 weeks later. And that was I would go to the hospital one night in the middle of the night and then compete the next day. Luckily come first, but still I look back and I'm like, I never really learned from a very young age when to be like, hang on, no, I need to rest, I need to recharge. I didn't have a voice. I just had a big drive and I wanted to impress the people supporting me, I guess.
So Georgia, talk to us about that drive. You know, one of the things we've discussed in this podcast in the past is that suck it up culture, where some people from some cultures have parents who are essentially always telling them to suck it up and fight through it and essentially ignore, the voices that your body sends to your conscious and subconscious brain. So talk to us about where your drive came from. Was it because you were from a culture, the suck it up culture? Was it because you had this childhood illness? And because you had this childhood illness and you were told that there were some things you couldn't do that you were just not going to be told? No, where did this come from? And we're going to talk about how it presented in a minute.
Yeah, I think it was a range of both of what you sort of just stated. It definitely was that you can't do it. Or just me always somewhat being sick. I was like, no, I can do everything everyone else can do. But I will say just a disclaimer, because obviously, as everyone knows, with Lyme disease and co-infections, it's tough with sometimes family and close people. So I just want to disclaim, I absolutely love my parents now. We're on very good terms, big disclaimer. However, it got very messy. And yes, they were the somewhat suck it up sort of parents. I also believe I heavily went along with the suck it up with my side of I'm not giving up. So it was a mix of both. But I feel very passionately about anything against the suck it up culture, because I now know I'm very much an empath. I'm extremely in tune with my body. I do give Lyme a lot of grace for that. But there were many times that I knew I shouldn't be doing what I was doing, and no adult around me listened to me. And I did have threats of, if I didn't get in the top 3, I wouldn't really have loved to come back to. And that being said, there was life going on with what was happening, but it very much made me feel if I do not succeed at what I'm doing, I will have no one and I have nothing. And I think that was made pretty clear to me by pretty much every adult around me.
All right, so let's
for
talk
a
about
long time.
Let's talk about elite athleticism, right? Because one of the patterns we've also seen with elite athletes that we've interviewed on this podcast is that there's a mindset issue that is sort of built into young elite athletes that they may or may not be aware of, that requires them to essentially earn the love of the people who are essentially supporting them on their quest to become elite athletes. Is that what happened with you, that you were essentially given the edict that if you didn't work hard and you didn't have success, that you weren't worthy of love?
Yes, very much so. And interrupt me if I'm going to, but I very much, it actually has taken and still is a choice to choice moment today, of reminding myself, no, that is my child trauma, and that is not true. That is a lie created, but I am worthy of this help. I am worthy of this support. If I'm doing even nothing, if I'm literally just resting, it is still a reminder to this day. And it was actually a really big issue when I started feeling a bit of my symptoms come in. It was quite hard. I pushed through for so long, and I couldn't, because if I gave into what I was feeling internally, I would have literally no one, no nothing. I'd never been allowed to work. I'd never been allowed to have any savings, and every egg was in that basket. So it very much was suffocating. And yeah, I felt that I had to pretty much win to have any sort of love, support from any aspect of human.
All right, so let's talk about your role in this, right? Because you were setting goals for yourself. You knew from a very early age that you were a gifted athlete. You knew from a very early age that you wanted to pursue an athletic career. What role did you play in this, in setting goals for yourself and dreaming about a future as a professional athlete?
I believe that my goals are really, and it does come back. I definitely had my own personal goals. Speaking from me as like a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, like when I was on the national team, it was to represent my country, but also sadly, it was to prove to everyone around me. It was a lot to do with proof. And I'm just going to be so honest. It was to prove to people around me that, look, apparently this is the path I've been put on. I'm so naturally good at it. And there are a lot of people who had the mental drive, the love, and I had the natural talent. So for me, sadly, a lot of it was to prove to people, I'm not going to waste this natural talent. I got told as a kid I wasn't allowed to do any of this. It has been impressing everyone, especially leaving Australia to come to America. Social media was just coming up. I wanted to prove to people that, hey, look at me, I can do it. And I think I do look back now, and I do actually coach kids for skiing now. And I make sure very early on, are you doing this for you, or are you doing this for anyone else? Who are you doing this for? Because sadly, my history was I was not doing it for myself. I was just luckily very talented and had a good work drive and had a high pain tolerance. So it seemed to line up. But it was not for myself, sadly.
So before we move on from this point, can you share with us the successes that you had? Meaning, we know you were very, very successful and you were actually a captain of the team. So talk to us about all the successes that you've had while you were going through this process.
So for me, I have quite severe dyslexia and quite severe ADHD, and my mom was very smart to see early on that in the Australian school system, I'd be broken down. She saw my athleticism and she knew that there I'd have confidence no matter what. So for me, what I feel so achieved in is being with a team, learning how to travel at a young age, be with so many different humans that you have one thing that you're really passionate about, but a lot that you don't have in common. The mind over matter, it's a give and take, but I learned how to push it to the extreme and then learn how to dial it back. I really give so much grace to learning how to compete, but mainly how to lose. Because in life, sadly, it's a lot of losses and a couple wins. So my biggest grace that I learned was how to lose and keep going and really push through that. And instead of losing and going down, losing and setting 2 goals ahead. And just understanding that losses in life will happen. That is the biggest thing I take away from being an elite athlete and being a representative for Australia and being, looked up to, I guess.
So talk to us about some of the competitions that you competed in on behalf of your country.
So the biggest one I ended up doing that I'm most proud of is the US Nationals, or honestly NORAMs, which is a step below World Cup. But my biggest goal was getting onto the Australian team. And I was just so proud to have moved from Australia, but still be representing Australia. And that me not being in Australia, they still were proud to have me represent them. That was really major. It's a feeling of community. That was so major to me in the competition, was the feeling of community. And then even all the countries coming together. The community and understanding we are all fighting for this. And yes, we're competing against each other, but we all have that same goal and we're all going through the same training process, and we will fight and we will do it as much as we can. I think that is definitely the biggest competition takeout. Also apologies, I do somewhat have COVID Lyme brain right now, so I do see myself trailing, but I think we will get it.
You're not trailing at all. I think you're very much on point, and it's my job to make sure that you stay with us, and you're doing a great job. So don't
amazing.
Don't
That's a classic little Lyme anxiety there, I guess.
Yeah. So I can't help you with the anxiety, but I can assure you, you are very much on point. So let's talk about when your symptoms first developed. We now know you have Lyme disease. I mean, you wouldn't be on this podcast if you didn't. That's a prerequisite for joining us. Before we get to your diagnosis, I want you to talk to us about when you first started to feel symptomatic.
Yes. And I think earlier in the podcast, I mentioned I had a lot of kidney issues and I had a reconstruction when I was 14 years old. I also moved to America when I was around 13, 14 years old. With kidney issues, you do get quite a lot of rashes. And with the antibiotics I was taking, I was just getting random rashes. So I, now knowing later, but basically I can now look back and know that I did probably have a rash. I never knew about ticks, as I said earlier. I did not see that as a rash from a bullseye, etc. My first symptoms, very much similar to Matt, were neurological. I think the physical ones I probably couldn't pick up on because I was so good at kind of putting them to the side. And I knew how to do ice baths and all of that to kind of, at least, I thought it was all to do with my fitness.
Okay,
so my biggest one.
Let's pause there for a second. Because one of the things we've learned from some of our guests in the past who have been a part of the suck up culture is that because they're, especially elite athletes, because they're constantly working through pain and ignoring pain, they've actually lost touch with their ability to feel pain, to feel their emotions, to understand what emotions are. And as a result of that, when they're getting signals from their body, or when the average person would be getting signals from their body, you don't even get them. So talk to us about that. Do you think perhaps you were symptomatic and you just literally lost the ability to feel the signals from your body until you suffered the neurological impairment?
Absolutely. I truly believe that at around 15, 14, I started getting the physical symptoms. And we just, because I had my kidney pass, we blamed it all on that. But I was in and out of hospitals, and I would kind of leave with, and I was always sick or always hurt. And then I'd push through them, and it was more than others, but I would push through harder. Now looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was obviously Lyme. But yeah, no, I was completely out of touch. And it even, and I know we'll get to it, but even after the diagnosis, I even to this day, there are times that I do not believe what I'm feeling in my body. And I do not even, I still question, did I actually have Lyme disease? Which is so bizarre, because I have the proof, I know I did, but there is still that, because of the suck up culture, there is still that block in my mind sometimes of like, is this real? Is this not? Am I just being a wuss, basically? And so it was, I definitely was, looking back now, it was so obvious. But I absolutely just, until the neurological ones, until I literally wasn't a human, I just ignored it and I just thought it was athletic issues.
So you started feeling symptoms somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 years old. And when did you finally get diagnosed with Lyme disease?
I finally got somewhat diagnosed with Lyme disease when I was around, probably around 17, 18. So around, it was in end of, I believe, 2015 or 16. A little background for that, because it is a key part of the story for me, is I basically started feeling really severe symptoms in my senior year of high school. So spring of 2015, I finally went off my antibiotics for my kidneys. And that had, without us knowing, that had kept the swelling, I guess, in my brain down. So that's why the neurological symptoms hadn't come out as much. So I went off these antibiotics, and it was meant to be the most exciting moment, because, oh my goodness, I'm off my antibiotics, my kidneys are better. Finally, I've been sick my whole life. Goodness gracious, I'm there. I'm also about to graduate. I'm on the Australian ski team. I have a scholarship to Denver Business School. Everything was like top going for me. And then I just remember this spring of high school, and the OCD, I stumble on the paralysis. Thank you. There you go. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. Like, I started realizing all these things and saying to people, I need help. And I looked very healthy though. And I was very, very good at making myself look extremely healthy. I graduated, went to Australia, training on the Australian ski team, and it was just this massive change. These coaches that had worked with me for years, I was standing on snow and just crying, and I was never a crier. It would just, there were these triggers, and I'd been doing backflips pretty much my entire life, never really crashing them, and suddenly I'd go off the jump, blackout, drop to my face. And I remember finally, after me, and I also, as I said earlier, I'd been traveling since 11 years old, where we barely had phones. I started calling my parents in America 24/7, and I'm 17 at this point, and I'd never done that. And I was like, I need help. This is not me. I need help. I do not feel that I am myself. I need help. I feel out of body. And then finally, there was this one big crash. And I think my coach, I don't remember too much of this, but my coach just called my parents in the US and was like, this is not the Georgia we've trained. This is not the human we know. And she needs serious help. We don't know what's happening, but it's not Georgia. And my parents, I will say, did not listen to that. It was not until a week later that I finally got a physical symptom, a seeing symptom in my neck, in my throat. I got these big ulcers. And that's finally, and it was like mono or strep. That's finally when any adult, apart from my coach that called, was like, oh, she may need some medical help. That's when everything started happening. And my parents did see me, and they were like, okay, this isn't Georgia, because I was having these extreme like burst outs and blackouts, and then not remembering anything, getting numb, getting seizures. I just was not myself, like looking into not there. And I was extremely depressed, very suicidal at the time. And everyone around me just kept saying, you have everything right now. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this for attention? And I was sitting there like, you don't think there's another way I could get attention? Like, this is not the way I would choose. And I remember feeling crazy because I would sit there being like, guys, I'm not myself. My arms are shaking. And I can't say what people thought, but I felt as though I was sitting there and doing this, like shaking my hands on purpose. But then I would sit there and look at my hands shaking and be like, stop. And it wouldn't stop. And I'd be like, I would still think I was like tricking myself, and that's the suck it up culture. I don't even know. But I just remember sitting there and like testing myself and being like, are you putting this on? Are you trying to get attention? And so fast forward, we get back to America. Luckily, we did have a doctor in Connecticut. And my mom is somewhat in the holistic world. So she did a massive panel of blood tests. And I got mainly diagnosed with pandas. Maybe put that in the description because I can't do that, what it actually means. But basically it was swelling in my brain and the outbursts and anorexia and etc. And then a side thing on that report for pandas was Lyme disease. So that's technically when I got diagnosed. And that was, I believe, November 2015, maybe 2015 without a doubt. And I remember we got pandas and we ran with pandas. And there was that side thing of Lyme, but we had no clue what Lyme was. We'd never heard of it, so we didn't pay attention to it. It was like, oh, okay, whatever. That's just happens to be there as well. And a little bit more on from that, I then remember my eating, because also I just lost my entire ski career at this point. I was meant to be training for the Olympics, and me leaving was pretty much career down the toilet. And that was a lot for my parents to handle because they'd put a lot into it. So there was also a lot of toxic energy happening around in that.
Georgia, let's pause there for a second, right? Because you did share with us that your career as a professional skier was really more your parents' dream than it was yours.
Yeah.
So when this happened, did you feel on some level a little relief?
I was extremely relieved. As sad as that is. Now looking back, I think my gut knew for a long time how sick I was, and that's why I felt I didn't want to ski. But I remember sitting on chairlifts at like my last season and thinking, I wish I'd tear my ACL this run, so then the adults don't have an excuse but to let me rest.
Okay, let's pause there for another second, because Matt's going to take you through your diagnosis and your treatment. I want you to look back with me for a minute, because you're developing a really important point here, and I don't want to lose this. I'm assuming you were symptomatic long before the crash. Yes. And you, at the same time, because you were dealing with other health issues, you were constantly in touch with medical professionals. Yes. Now that you know what you know about Lyme disease, and now reflecting on how the symptoms were developing, were you sharing those symptoms with your healthcare professionals? And do you believe that a competent healthcare professional would have been able to diagnose you with Lyme disease before the crash? I believe with where it is today, I believe if I went in with the symptoms I was going in at 15 years old, they would have diagnosed me with Lyme disease pretty quickly. It was very clear. I still have all my diaries from that time, and I can look at my notes and be like, tiredness, aches, like just the classic ones. And I remember writing like, I feel like my other teammates aren't having these, and I'm doing everything more than that. Like I'm doing my recovery longer, or I'm eating healthier, and they're still not having the same things I'm having. And I remember being very annoyed by it. So I do believe, yes, I believe a very competent Lyme doctor at this point would have easily seen it. I believe it was quite obvious now looking back, knowing what I know. Now, do you believe that perhaps you may have been, as a patient, a little less aggressive in emphasizing these symptoms when you were meeting with your doctors, because you were a part of the suck it up culture, and because you were essentially developing your self-worth through the successes you were having as a representative of your country?
100%. I remember and I still have to choose not to do this, but I remember going to the hospital and always saying, there was a note on my hospital thing, she's going to rate her level of pain a lot lower than what it actually is. Because for me, saying anything above 5 was like, you're such a baby. So I could be feeling a straight 10, maybe 11, and I would say a 4 or a 3. And me saying a 6 was major. Like if my parents ever heard a 6 or my coach heard a 6, they were like, oh my gosh, doctors, please listen to this because she doesn't do that. So Georgia, absolutely, I definitely like lowered my actual pain and stress.
Georgia, your history so far with Rich is so typical in the Lyme journey. And I don't mean to stereotype you at all, but it's just unfortunate that so many people go through this journey and down this path, and then it ends up being Lyme disease. The other kids weren't getting sick like I was from the foods. I was sleeping good and they weren't, and I wasn't healthy. I was having these emotional problems, these physical problems, and nobody could figure out why. Everybody was doubting if it was real. Was it all in my head? My labs are coming up normal, but I was still so sick, right? That's like all these things are classic Lyme disease, scenarios. And I think people need to think more about Lyme disease when you're in your situation, right? So thank you for sharing that with everybody, because that lays the context to your diagnosis now. And now, I mean, you're 18 years old, right? Your skiing career is now gone. You are getting diagnosed with, and I think it's ridiculous. Not that pandas is not an important factor, but to put Lyme off to the side would bother me about what you said to Rich. It was like, you have pandas, you have brain inflammation, which is causing some of your emotional issues. However, you have Lyme disease, which is causing a ton of other symptoms, but we're not going to talk about that now. And I don't like how that was almost like an appetizer off to the side from your diagnosis standpoint, right? So as soon as you got that diagnosis of pandas with Lyme off to the side, what were you doing to treat with your doctor? I think it was in Connecticut, you said, Georgia, right?
When I got the pand, we went on to a bunch of holistic supplements, but a big issue at the time, I will say, my parents were getting divorced. So it was there was a whole lot of toxic stuff happening at the time as well. So I don't have too much memory of this, but I do remember, I think the first steps were, because of the pandas diagnosis, they said that I had triggers. And it seemed to me at the time that my mother and my sister were a trigger. So straight away, it split up our family. My dad, who's a very easygoing dude, I seemed to be able to be with him because he wouldn't trigger me. He wouldn't start anything. So we came to Vermont. My mom and sister stayed in New York City. And I just remember, we just hid. We literally tried to start some antibiotics, but my OCD/anorexia and just everything was so off. I couldn't eat enough to get the tablets in. And if I got the tablets in, I would feel really bloated and I'd throw it up. And it was just a cycle of mess. Then I'd have these massive blackout attacks, like anger. Now we know it was Babesia or Bartonella, correct me, whichever one it is, that has the anger, but these extreme outbursts. And I am 5'3", if that, and my dad is 6'3". I also had just come off being a top athlete. I pretty much beat him up in these attacks, trying to beat up myself, but him, because I felt like I felt a devil, literally a devil inside of me. And I kept trying to rip it out of me and like hit it out of me. And it just felt so out of body. And my poor father would like try to weigh me down. And I just happened to be very strong. And then I'd come out of it and have no recollection. And he would be pretty traumatized. I'd be traumatized, be like, what the heck just happened? And then I did start using marijuana quite a bit at this point, because it was able to help me eat. It was able to help me sleep. And my parents didn't really understand that. So they were getting annoyed that I was kind of being sneaky with that. But I was seeing that and I was like, but it helps me eat and I cannot eat otherwise. So I don't get why this is bad.
Georgia, I just want to interrupt you because Rich and I are chatting offline right now. And anybody, I know the people listening to this can't see me, but I was smiling as you were describing your Lyme rage. And I apologize if that was probably inappropriate. But the reason I was smiling, Georgia, is because you described it so brilliantly. And as somebody who's gone through the journey, I couldn't have said it any better than you did. So thank you for, first of all, sharing that and explaining it so well, because I felt validated in my own experience. And I know our listeners are going to feel validated as well, because you cannot describe that Lyme rage. And I certainly have never been able to put the words the way you did. So thank you for that, first of all. That was really well said.
Of course. And I will come in there and say there is one poem, and it's very much on the Lyme rage, because I was like, you guys know me as a human. How do you think this is me doing it? Like, me choosing to do this? Like, don't you know me as a human deep down? Like, can't you look at me and not see me? Like, this is not me doing that. And that was so hard, especially at that age. I didn't know my values. I didn't know who I was. And so I thought that was me as a human. I just thought I was a horrible human. I was like, damn, if I wasn't this privileged, if I didn't look like this, I would be in jail, or I'd be dead, pretty much. And I kept saying that to my family and the people around me. I was like, guys, do you not, like, this is not me. But I will say, and if it's okay, I wrote a poem when I was, and it kind of links into the time of the story that we're in, was after these massive Lyme attacks. It got to the point that my sister, it was a post-Christmas, we couldn't do Christmas as a family because holidays were too much for me, too much food, too much to think about. I couldn't do it. I hid. They came around New Year's Eve, and New Year's Eve, I remember checking in to an eating disorder ward, because at this point I just needed to be inpatient, because it was like scary.
George, I'm going to interrupt you again. I apologize. I just want to ask a question, because, you know, once again, I see this, we're seeing this story build up, and OCD, anorexia, your blackout symptoms, your rage, your physical symptoms, all of these things are indicative of a tick-borne illness, Lyme disease, co-infections, right? And we know that pandas is extremely common in children with tick-borne illness diagnoses, right? So here we are, you have a pandas diagnosis, which generally comes hand in hand, not all the time, but oftentimes with a tick-borne illness. In children, you are a child, but nobody's saying, let's think about Lyme disease. Now, the anorexia, one of our first podcast guests told us that she believed there was a connection between Lyme disease and anorexia. And that thought
Absolutely
has been built out over the last 300 interviews that we've done by many other people who have believed the same thing. And a lot of research today is pointing to a connection between Lyme and anorexia as well. So with all of these connections that we're making here in this podcast, none of your doctors, nobody around you, nobody in your family thought we should bring Lyme up to the forefront and look at it. Or no, she's got this pandas and we can't treat her because she's too anxious, and we're just going to go put her into an anorexia clinic. That was the thought process at the time.
Yep.
Okay, so that makes my blood boil, and I'm just sorry that you had to go through all that. And hopefully this podcast and all the awareness we're doing will change that, Georgia. So
really appreciate. Sorry for interrupting.
No, please.
So I remember sitting in that eating disorder ward, and this is written on the 13th of July. And so I'd been in there for nearly 2 weeks at this point. I checked in on New Year's Eve. And I just remember sitting there trying to get to my parents and my friends and anyone, like, guys, I also remember trying to say to it was when I got the pandas. I called my high school friends and I was like, guys, I got a diagnosis. The reason I've been so weird, so wild, is I have pandas. And they were like, so what are you going to do? What's the thing? And I was like, well, we don't know yet. They're like, well, can you just not tell us then and not really contact us until you figure it all out? I remember, I feel that comment sank so deep into me, because I was so stoked to get any sort of clarification why I was feeling how I felt. And so I wrote this poem, and it's a little long, but it is a poem that I know anyone will connect to, and I am going to read it.
Please do.
It is called The Devil Inside of Me. I'm bad at reading, so I'm going to use my finger. There is a devil inside of me. I am his disguise. He is taking over, crept his way inside, picking and pulling, punching and pounding. Constant chatter, no good for the ears, only leaving me mad and in fear. I've lost my way, being locked away. The devil holds the key, not quite sure I'll be able to break it free. Close my eyes, I see the devil, keep them open, and I'm left vulnerable. But worst of all, everyone else will see what's really happening inside of me. Lack of control, now my current theme. He's come in and ruined every one of my scenes. Barely breathing, continuous aching. Stab me, slash me, now he's screaming. There's a devil inside of me, I am his disguise. Locked in a jail, visible only to me. Sick and tired, no way to break free. stripping me of my dignity repetitively, trying to drown him in both pills and potions. But the funny thing is, he's just learning to swim. So why even bother when the devil is just growing stronger? Barely breathing, lack of control. He strikes again, and oh so bold. I'm trying to speak up, but in he cuts. Let me speak up. Let me reach recovery. There's a devil inside of me. I am his disguise. Someone please help me. Someone please save me. Because these pills and potions aren't doing a thing. Barely breathing. Where will he strike next? First my family, friends, you'll be up next. And slowly but surely, he'll bring them to an end. Heart racing, head pounding. He's constantly screaming. Slap me, stab me, and finally shoot me. There's a devil inside of me. I am his disguise. No more is he just that little side bloke. He's taken over, sucking at all of my hope. Pills and potions, just keeping him entertained, but sober him up and he's right back for more games. I'm trying to push through, but I'm not sure if I can cope. He's growing and expanding, and he's made me his permanent home. Where have I gone, and where is this mysterious key? He has locked me away for no one else to see. There is a devil inside of me, though no more am I his disguise. He has become me, and I have been locked deep, deep inside. I'm not fighting myself. I'm fighting a fight against the evil devil that has taken over my inside.
Georgia, I have to tell you, you gave me the chills. You gave me the chills at that. And I'd like to, if you're comfortable, post that as a link in, obviously credit you, and possibly as a guest blog post on our website to link to you on the show notes of this podcast, and also share, you know, in your words, and credit you, of course, with our social media, because that is something that I would never be able to put into words that you described. And once again, that validated my experience. And I think will be so powerful for somebody listening to this podcast that can relate to that, because you truly can't comprehend what it's like to go through this journey until you're there, right? And I think that poem describes that better than any words I could ever use. So again, thank you for that. And if you're willing, we'd love to put, you know, in some way, a link to that in the show notes.
Of course. And I will say with that poem, which is what's ironic about it, was that's when I still didn't really think about Lyme. And so I remember writing that poem, sending it out, and I didn't think about it for a good 3-4 years. And then finally, when I got to a point, I was like, wait a minute. It came up in like one of my memories, and I was like, oh, I wrote that. It was so shocking to me, because I remember I was so out of it, but I read it. I'm like, wow, I did know what was happening before I actually knew what was happening. And that poem to me, I read it. I don't remember, right? I do somewhat, but it was like, it is, I want to share that poem a lot, because I read it back and I was like, wow, that made a lot of sense.
So Georgia, walk us through, because we have heard in young children that the aggression and the rage is really powerful. So we've had some people tell us that their children literally, you know, I don't know how to describe it, will beat the crap out of their parents, and they have to have their children move out with one of the spouses, because one of the dad will have to live with the child and try to help them while they're in this Lyme rage, which, you know, is sort of connected to the pandas. How severe was this rage, and how severe was the physical, you know, I'll call it, I don't want to say abuse, but how severe was this between you and your parents? And it sounds like you were getting into physical altercations with your dad, and he was trying to control you.
So I will say, to make clear, for me personally, it was against myself. It was against that devil inside of me. It was not. And then my dad would see me beating up. I basically hit my head severely into glass walls, windows. There was multiple my-shaped heads in the walls. There's ticked holes in the walls. It was never attacking anyone else. It was attacking inside of me. And then the loved ones around me would be like, what the heck are you doing? Trying to calm me. And whatever it was like, get the heck away from me. And I kind of knew as well how strong I was at the time. So that scared me even more. So I'd go harder at myself. But basically, for me, looking back, I believe I really didn't know who it was terrifying, because it wasn't myself, and I was so young that I didn't know it wasn't myself. So I thought I was a very scary human. And that made me even madder, I guess, which didn't help. And it was this sort of loop. And then I'd come out of it and be so ashamed and not really remember anything and be beaten up, like blood everywhere, holes in the wall, broken chairs, and my parents looking at me like, who is this? And I didn't know what had just happened. So I can't, it's really tough to put into words, but I can, like, when I talk about it, my body kind of cringes up and like, I can feel it, because it was this anger of like, I feel like my learning, it was just all taken away is what I guess. Now I don't even, that's what I'm still trying to process
but
it.
Georgia, was this all chalked up to the pandas, because pandas causes these neuropsychological problems? Like, what was your family and doctors saying was the root cause of your sudden changed behavior of being so violent against yourself? Was it just saying, oh, it must be the pandas?
That's pretty much what it is. And there was just a lot of other stuff going on. So there was a lot of time I was sort of left. I started living by myself when I was 15, to clarify. So there was a lot of time I was just left by myself, and kind of dealt with it by myself. So yeah, it kind of kept getting chalked up to pandas, I guess. And then I myself started to try and do some more research into it. And then the doctor who originally diagnosed me with pandas, her son had Lyme at the time when she diagnosed me with pandas. And so I don't think she was giving full awareness to what, basically she came back a couple months later. I guess my father tried to call her, being like, this is more, we're not getting the help we need. What the heck is happening? It's getting worse. The pills, it just doesn't, it's not working. And I think she said, oh, my son, I've just realized he has Lyme. And then from there, Lyme came more into it. And it's still like, I think I have a very blurry memory of all of this, but I remember looking at the papers and seeing Lyme and just looking up every co-infection or whatever they'd written down. And I remember reading about Lyme somewhat and being like, hang on, this kind of makes sense to what's happening here. For me, it was more the Babesia bartonella with the anger, because that's what scared me the most. That's when I was like, there's something more here. And then, then we reached out to the doctor, and she confirmed Lyme is actually pretty bad. And then that's when we were living in New York City, and I sat down and I found a very holistic place. And no, cut that out. No, that's not what happened. Skipped a whole year.
Are you good?
Basically, I remember she recommended us to a doctor, and then I started the 2 years of modern medicine to then cure Lyme and inflammation. That's what it was. We met an inflammation doctor. I've just met with so many doctors. And
it's impossible to remember things in chronological order, Georgia. So you are not alone. Nobody remembers things perfectly in time order. So don't be hard on yourself for this. But just to clarify, when your doctor finally said, "Hey, I think Lyme could be a big picture," she referred you out to another doctor who for 2 years you treated with for inflammation and Lyme.
Yes.
Okay. Now, were you doing things that were kill protocols? Was it herbs, was it antibiotics? What were you doing to address the Lyme and in parallel address the inflammation?
So my mom, already we just went gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, because my mom just knew that from younger ages because of ADHD. So luckily I had that from mom. So I instantly went to that. And then I was doing a lot of herbs and a lot of holistic atmos things. That didn't help. So then that's when we found a doctor who technically couldn't legally treat Lyme. So, and he said, we're going to give you he acknowledged I had Lyme and he wanted to help me, but he could not legally treat it, I guess. So then I spent 4.5 months of getting all these tests to prove I had another illness, to then go and get my IVIG shot. I believe you guys may have heard of that.
This is for IVIG, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, that's actually most people we know who get IVIG treatment for Lyme disease have to get an official diagnosis of something else
Yes.
just to get the proper treatment for Lyme, to get the IVIG, because the insurance companies won't cover it for Lyme disease. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
Okay.
So I remember getting 4 months of different tests. I've still got scars of all these
What
skin
tests
tags.
were they? Would you recall what they diagnosed you with? Because a lot of people, it's generally
I can't remember
autoimmunity.
I can't sadly remember that. I can hopefully try to find it out. Probably my dad will have it, but I still have 4 scars along my legs of like pieces of like holes of skin they took out. I remember going through 4 months of tests, still not even knowing what I got diagnosed with, but suddenly I had the diagnosis to get my IVIG.
So wait, you had chunks of skin ripped off your leg to get you a diagnosis on paper that wasn't necessary just to justify your treatment for Lyme disease, which you knew you had and you were ultimately trying to treat. So you were basically scarred for the purposes of getting proper treatment.
Yep. And on top of that, just to make very clear, I come from a very privileged family. So what always hit me on top of that is, what the heck is happening to everyone else if I'm coming from this much privilege and this is what we're having to go through? It was now I can look back and be like, I was an empath, so that's why that weighed on me a lot. But it was really stressful to me, because I'm like, if we're having to go through this many blockades, I couldn't even talk to my friends that we had to lie about getting this IVIG. And it got to a point that when I started my podcast, my dad was actually scared for me to talk about that openly. And I was like, no, I don't care. Like, I am so sick of this, because I need them to know that I'm this privileged and this is how hard it was. And I was like, there has to be more than the politics. This is not okay, because so many people would not be here.
And the fact that you have some doctors that are wanting to help you and their hands are tied until they have to go through this whole ridiculous set of tests just to get you the treatment. And with Lyme disease, you never know what's going to work, right? So IVIG may help me, but it may not help you. So this isn't a guaranteed slam dunk either, correct?
Exactly. And it helped. And for instance, I ended up getting IVIG for, I think it was about 14 months. And it was, I was living in the city, and it was really hard. I also, at this point, I'd quit skiing. I'd lost my entire everything, my identity. I completely lost it. I was now living in New York City, and I was just trying to figure out what the heck is happening at this age. My parents at the time didn't fully understand how bad these illnesses were. So they were still quite bitter about the loss of skiing. So it very much was on my own, and I got pushed to do. I was suddenly never had a job, very ill, having to go to Connecticut, and I was put in very uncomfortable situations to just survive. And it was really hard, because I also looked so healthy. Everyone knew that I was from somewhat of a privileged family, that I had no support, friends, family, nothing. I also didn't help myself there, because my ego from skiing was too big, that I like put out on Instagram that I was doing so well, when in reality, the reason my photos were so good was I was sitting at home doing nothing, and I could set up a little selfie camera and like make it look perfect and make it look like this whole thing. And that was my own ego thing, but it obviously didn't help with getting any sort of support. And
but social media is a place where everybody puts on the best version of themselves, right? So you're not alone in that. Everybody does
and
that.
Especially when it first came out. It's hopefully changing now.
But my point is to that people shouldn't judge you based on how you're looking, because even if you look that great every single day, that's why we have the term invisible illness, which, right? So many people in the Lyme community always talk about the invisible illness stigma. You look great, you can't be sick. So but I do want to ask you, so you're in New York City, you're getting IVIG. It sounds like you did it for a few months and it helped a little bit. And then it sounds like you pivoted over to Connecticut to see another doctor. Is that what happened? That's what
the Connecticut, the IVIG was in Connecticut. So I'd be getting the train 2 hours. Basically, I would be able to work successfully for 2 weeks in the middle of the month. But when I got the IVIG, it put me bedridden for a week. I was able to somewhat work 2 weeks. And then that last week was just all the symptoms came back. And it was just this like constant up and down, up and down, up and down. And it was really hard for me to commit to anything, because I, again, was an athlete. I knew to show up. I knew what it looked like if you didn't show up. And so I just started very much backing away from most things, because I mentally and emotionally couldn't handle not showing up, let alone not showing up and not being my best self.
Let me ask you a question, George, about that, because I know my personal experience, and Rich can speak to this. When we first started this podcast just 2.5, 3 years ago, I missed many podcast episodes. I was so sick at the time. And the emotional impact I let that have on me, I believe made me even sicker, because I knew I was letting Rich down. I knew I was letting the guest down. And I think a lot of that anticipation contributed to my worsening of symptoms, right? So I was almost like my own worst advocate, because I just feel like, yes, I wasn't well, but then the way I responded to it emotionally made me feel worse. And I'm not saying it's in my head. I'm not saying I was completely crazy, but my emotional response worsened the symptoms, right? Do you feel it happens to you as well? Because I think I had to have that realization to really focus on my own thoughts to curtail or curb a worsening of symptoms when I have symptom flare up, if that makes sense. And I feel like you're describing that very well. And I think we're on the same page here with these concepts.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And honestly, perfect timing, because there's many times I've looked back at the IVIG, and I believe, for me at least, like the second I felt good, I felt like I had to do everything, take over the world. And then that obviously wasn't a great balance. So then I would run myself out. But I didn't, if I felt good, I would show up for my friends as much as I could, as much as like everything. I would try to do everything. And then I would be gone for 2 weeks and completely MIA, completely ruined. And then that would ruin me 10 times more because it's not showing up. And so I believe now, with years of education and more understanding about my human self and just etc., if I probably did the IVIG treatment now, knowing my boundaries, knowing all of that, it probably could have worked for me. But I didn't know how to rest, because I'd be laying in bed doing nothing, but that didn't mean my head and my emotions were not doing it. Like, they weren't resting. So I was laying there being like, 1, I've let my parents down on my skiing. 2, I'm not being a good friend. I can barely take my dog out to go to the bathroom. I can barely take myself to the bathroom. Like, I am an 18-year-old girl peeing myself in bed. Like, how is this okay? And like, everyone's off at college. Everyone's doing this. I had a scholarship. I had no break in my head. So I was laying in bed doing nothing, but I wasn't resting. And that, to be very clear, I learned that difference of, you can be in bed trying to rest, but you are not resting and you are not healing. And it is extremely different. Like, extremely different. And it's still, I have to remind myself day to day about that again.
Amen to that, Georgia. I can tell you, I fully understand what you're saying. I mean, when I was bedbound, I was in a constant state of fight or flight, and I was in a constant state of anxiety and fear and panic and disappointment, and you name it, all the emotions that were contributing to worsening symptoms. And I've had to learn to, even now, have grace on myself, and to, when I need to rest and have a calm mind and really get the true rest, both physical and mental. And without that, it's really difficult to heal from Lyme disease. I mean, that's something you're describing so brilliantly, and I never really thought about it as deeply until the way you're describing it now. So thank you for just using your beautiful way of describing things to describe the scenario again, because I don't think we think about this enough, that yes, we are sick, but if we can focus on how we respond to that, we can make things a little bit better, and maybe not worsening, maybe not make our journey as bad as it needs to be, right? And I know it's a hard thing to reflect on, but I really strongly believe that, Georgia.
And I think one more tag onto that, and this is, everyone takes it in their own manner, but for me, obviously coming from being an athlete, like, I really succeed on having a purpose and doing well at whatever the heck I'm doing. So it got to a point that, and thank gosh for my therapist for this, and I highly recommend everyone with Lyme get a therapist and have that therapist always. But very much, I ended up like, I needed to work to be able to rest in bed, because I couldn't just lay in bed for hours on end and I wouldn't rest. So I found a job that, I didn't really care about, but I cared enough to get up and show up, because that's who I am. If I've said yes to something, I want to do that. So I got a lower job that probably didn't hit any of my qualifications, but it was something that I had to show up. I only had to show up for 3 hours, and then I could come back and I could feel okay to rest the rest of the day. And so it's okay if you're resting. Is it just fully in your bed? Because sometimes you have to make compromises to mentally be able to rest. And that was a big issue for me, because I was like, how can I be saying to people, that I'm this ill and that I'm out working or I'm out doing something social, that's not going to look good. That's not going to make sense. I already look healthy. So that also came with age, but it's very much I want everyone to know listening, it's okay if you have a really bad moment or day or week, and then gosh forbid 2 minutes later you happen to feel slightly better to be able to show up. And if that's going to help you be able to come back and rest a little bit later, do that. Because I questioned myself so much. I was like, oh, I'm suddenly feeling good. Should I see my friends? Should I do something? And I was like too scared at points, because I was like, then if I do get really ill, they're not going to get it. So give your grace to you know yourself enough at this point. If you want to do something social so you can come back and rest after, you do that, because you know yourself enough, and trust your gut.
Yeah, this is so powerful. I mean, I'm telling you, I am truly, as you're speaking, Georgia, I'm seeing and reliving my past experiences of things that I did wrong, and now things that I've been able to improve that have helped me to heal. And you're describing them so brilliantly that I've never really been able to reflect on this way. So thank you. But I do want to hear now, what's going on next, because the IVIG helped you a little bit, but you had a lot of other things going on. It didn't help you in the way you needed it to. So what came next after IVIG?
After IVIG, I got really sick of the ups and downs, because I was getting a lot of amazing job offers and things I had to fully commit to. And I just knew with the IVIG process of the sort of up and down 2-week, 4-week roller coaster, I would not be able to show up. So I very much got online and I was like, there's got to be another way. And I was sick of modern medicine at this point. I was taking antibiotics to the point, and I was like, this just isn't working for me. I can't keep anything down. It's just not working for me. I can't take 42 pills a day. I can barely eat. So like, what? And so I got online and I found this place in West Palm Beach called Hippocrates. It has changed a bit now. I'm not sure where it's at now, but at the time it was really great for Lyme disease. I literally took it to my parents. I begged them, and basically fasten it up. Like, they make you go raw vegan, very like you go live there for a while. And for me, and there's a lot of cancer patients there who are kind of too far gone, but they're trying basically we put wheatgrass up our bums to cleanse ourselves. We went the extreme of the extremes. I went raw vegan. I also was just turned 19 at this point. I barely went to high school because I was skiing so much. So I was a very open mind. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is the only way to get through life. And it did. It changed my life. Going raw vegan for me did reset everything, and it was amazing. And I finally did make some growths. I was getting a lot of vitamin C IVs, and doing a lot of hyperbolic chambers.
Hyperbaric oxygen.
Right?
Yep.
Thank you. I was doing a lot of that sort of stuff, and it was a lot of wheatgrass, all the juices, all of that, and that completely changed my life. That being said, I then had to move back into reality at 19 years old into New York City and try live the raw vegan lifestyle, and also work and also continue getting better. And that kind of obviously blew. It did well for a little while, but kind of blew up in my face because it just wasn't feasible, realistic, any of that. There still was all the family stuff. Fast forward, I moved to Miami because I at least knew at that point I needed sun, and I needed to get away from all the toxicity of the people around me, because at that point I started realizing to myself, I know better than these people around me. I know I'm fighting something.
Georgia, but I'm sorry to interrupt again, but obviously you had
fine.
toxic people around you, right? But I'm just thinking New York City is a very toxic environment,
Yes.
both from a heavy metal standpoint, from a pollution standpoint, from a mold standpoint, because of, the nature of New York. So do you think that not only were you being exposed to toxicity in your relationships, but also real toxins in your environment that you were living,
Yes.
possibly mold, possibly heavy metals, and these things were weakening your immune system and not allowing you to build upon the gains you made on all of your previous treatments, it sounds like?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I also think an element there was still, again, with my athletic side, the ego is I had completely ditched the skiing community and I was living a cool, in quotation marks, life in New York City on Instagram. And it was really hard for my ego to be like, it's not as cool as it is. And it kind of sucks. And it's actually really crap. And
but then you moved to Florida, which is cool because it's really awesome, really nice weather down there. You're gonna get some vitamin D, right?
at this point, I kind of wanted to move back to Australia because I was like, everything's too toxic here. I'm done. But I couldn't do that because obviously Lyme disease is not acknowledged in Australia. So I was like, okay, I was like, the closest to that is maybe Miami Beach on the East Coast. So I moved to Miami Beach, did 2 years there. And I, at this point, had learned enough. I'd completely separated from my entire family. Like at this point, I was very much just Georgia by herself. No one got what was happening. I was so tired of explaining it. I was like, I need to go and just create a new world. And I went to Miami Beach and met this amazing therapist there. And it was great because there was sun and it was a more low-key life. And I knew enough about being a raw vegan, doing yoga. That's when I got my yoga certificate. I found a job that sort of worked for me. And I found things that worked enough. And I came into a new place that I made very clear to the people around me. I have a health issue. So when I say I'm not showing up, it's not personal. It's my thing. It's not personal. Like, trust me on that. And so that was a big step for me. It also was really tough because I also was 20 years old, still very ill, had literally no savings, and trying to survive in Miami Beach by myself whilst trying to pay for any Lyme doctor I could find.
But you're breaking that people pleaser mentality and you're setting boundaries, which is important when healing from Lyme disease. You're setting boundaries and saying, look, it's not personal. I'm sorry if I can't make it, but I have health issues, right? And communicating that is freaking hard as Lyme patients. It's really hard
I lost a lot of
to
people.
verbalize. But it's very freeing when you can do that as well. And I know it, and I think you know it, obviously, Georgia. It's freeing when you come out there and just say, you know what? I'm not having a good day. Sorry. I'm not going to do that today. It's such a burden off your mind and off your, the physical tension, the emotional tension that you have because you're just communicating better. But, in that regard, I mean, look, you left the toxic people around you, you left the toxic, environment, but there's a third, I think, aspect to the toxicity. So not in addition to the buildings, the mold, the heavy metals, the pollution, then all the toxic relationships in New York City. What about the toxicity of social media? Because you mentioned you were like really addicted to Instagram and, trying to show off, hey, look, I look so good. Let me spend 3 hours getting myself ready for a photo shoot for Instagram. Talk about the dark side of social media and how that impacted your healing journey.
Oh my goodness. It was extremely hard. I obviously had left Australia I think also to make very clear with my Lyme brain, it sounds so dumb, but I had not put together in my mind that like social media is very social and goes everywhere. It sounds, but like I really thought I was just proving it to my high school friends. That it sounds so, and like at this point I had like 17K people following me, and like I genuinely still was just posting to prove to my high school group, like from the people that said.
How many people were in your graduating class, Georgia? Was it over 17,000 people?
It was 35 people. If that. Like, that's what I find so funny. And I went so ham, and I actually was very successful at Instagram because it was so catered to like, no, I'm doing cool, I'm doing great, when I was horrible. It's hysterical to me. And I was really good at doing it. And I happened to be like the Australian who's like, there was a good bout, like, think of social media. I was pretty textbook to what would get like acknowledged. And so I used it, but it was the most toxic thing I probably could have done in my entire healing journey, because how are my family in Australia meant to understand what my parents are trying to say when I'm posting like me being this top model or like in these top places, and how that doesn't make sense. And I do not, now looking back, I don't expect them to try and make sense of that. But I remember in myself the time I'm like, I'd be proud that I'm this sick and can do that. And it's like, no, they didn't see the sickness. They're like, this girl's living in America, doing her Miami life. Like, of course no one would relate. It was toxic as heck. And then there'd be times I'd try to reach out and try to get some sort of sympathy, whether it was friends or employees or anything. And it was like, girl, you've posted that on Instagram. I'm like, okay, but that was 4 weeks ago. Like, I'm sitting in bed now melting. That was full. How does everyone believe this is happening right now?
But this is a really good topic.
I'm
sorry to interrupt again, Georgia. This is a really good topic, right? Because there's several facets to this I want to discuss with you. The first one is you mentioned earlier, and the stereotypical saying in the Lyme community, and you said it much better, is Lyme healing is not linear, meaning it's an up and down journey, right? So just because you felt great 4 weeks ago doesn't mean you're not completely sick today and stuck at home because you need to recover and you're having a flare, right? That's the first thing that people don't really understand about chronic Lyme disease. I also
think it can happen in the same day, it can also happen in the same hour, and it can happen in the same 10 minutes.
Absolutely. Amen to that
and
too, right?
That's what people don't get to understand, is that quick switch back or quick switch there. It can happen like that and like that.
And on that note though,
and
so another thing is, and right, you have no control over it. But another thing I think we do as patients sometimes is really damaging to our emotions and to our psyche is many of us will say, I had a great week, I am fully healed. And they go out there on social media and they say, I'm healed, I beat Lyme disease, I'm in remission. And then a week later, they're, oh my God, I can't get out of bed, I'm dying, I'm so sick, I don't know what's going on. And this cycle occurs, Georgia, where this happens, literally cyclical, and you can predict it with these people on social media. And it's like, oh, they're healed this week, next week they're going to be in bed, and it's really sad. But we have to realize that when we're healing, we're going to have, as we keep climbing that ladder, we're going to have weeks where we feel symptom free, and then we're going to have maybe a couple of days where we feel like crap, and that's going to keep happening until we finally reach, our ultimate goal of true health, right? But I think it's damaging to our psyche to think when we have a good week that we're cured or fully healed and not going to have a relapse. What are your thoughts on that, and that the impact that has on the individual who is doing this and believing they're cured or healed in the moment?
I think I have a couple. I think the first thing I want to state on that is, first of all, whether you're sick or not, you're gonna have good and bad days. You're gonna have good and bad moments. Happiness is a choice. And I think reminding yourself of that is so key, because I'll get very far with my Lyme and then I just have a bad day in another way, like a very petty thing. And because of my Lyme, sometimes I shouldn't say petty. It is a very real thing happening that has affected me, made me sad, and maybe not have such a great day. And it is just because I'm feeling healthy, I can still have a bad day, because that is life. So I think putting that right there is a big thing of, either way, things are gonna go up and down. That's just how it is, because you don't know the good unless you have the bad. So I think that is the biggest thing. And then I think when it comes to the Lyme is, can you just re-ask the last question again slightly? My brain went a little.
No, you're good. I mean, well, first of all, happiness is a choice. I couldn't agree more, right? It's all about how we approach things. And I think we can make painful situations a little less painful if we approach them differently. And beyond that, one of our favorite guests made the quote, don't wait until you're healed to live your life, right? And I think it's really powerful too. You don't have to be in remission or cured to live your life. You can be healing and still live your life and still be happy. And I think that's something that a mistake I make often, and a lot of people in Lyme can make often. Either I'm sick and I can't function and I don't have a life, or I'm cured or healed and in remission. But you can live your life while healing, and you can be happy while healing. And I think that's the thing we need to really clarify for this community, and again for myself, and I think for you, because it was so hard for us to realize that. But my question is, and it's sort of in line with what I just said, when people have that I'm healed, and then they have a really bad couple of days, and then they have I'm healed, and you can truly see the emotional distraught on these people's faces when they come and say, I'm sick again, right? I feel like that's something that you have to, as a patient, address and almost manage, so you're not having an emotional letdown, which is going to contribute to worsening symptoms, right?
Okay, yes. So I have and it's actually a very recent story to this. The thing is I don't think there's ever healed. And it's not because it's like you're going to be sick forever. Let me make that very clear. It is the fact that this is a part of your story now, and you're always going to keep learning from it in different manners. Whether it's just a memory of some level, or a trauma of some level, or whatever it is, or a relationship, it is not ever going, maybe it'll be healed, but you're not going to stop growing from it, because it is a part of your story. And so I think the biggest, and honestly, me, my friends, my therapist, we all joke about this, because basically I'll be like, oh, I'm finally better. And literally the next day or an hour later, I'm in hospital. It is so on point to the fact that I say, oh, I'm better. And then it all hits the fan. So I have made it a very trained point to never say now, like, it's done, I'm better. And the biggest reminder of that, and that literally just hit in the past 2 weeks, was we actually did have to delay this recording because I'd made this entire time with COVID without getting COVID. And that was I felt it was my biggest fear, was to get COVID. And I literally moved to Vermont to hide out, be rid of anything. Basically, I had also booked this podcast probably 4 months ago, 5 months ago. I'm not going to book it until I can show up. I'd been told I hit remission on August 3rd. So I was like, I'm going to book it right near there. And so there's me again, trying to like make things black and white. Nothing is black and white. And then of course, literally 2 days before this podcast, I get COVID and I end up having probably the worst post-traumatic stress attack of my life, because I got COVID and I recently have felt the healthiest in my life I have ever felt, and got this brain clarity that's like, oh my goodness, like this is incredible. And I never want to lose that. And then suddenly I get this it all hits so quickly. This 103-degree fever. I'm kind of out of it. Then I get paralyzed again on my body. And I get all it felt like my Lyme symptoms just came back within 30 minutes. And the 2 years that I'd hidden from the world, done nothing, was just gone. And I'd completely gone back to step one, and I couldn't, it was terrifying. And then the fact that I knew at that point I hadn't kept down enough water and I hadn't eaten enough, that I knew I had to go to the hospital. And I was too scared to go to the hospital because I was in such an anxiety attack that, gosh forbid, I would end up in the psych ward because I said one thing wrong because of my trauma from when I came to hospitals before. And then this beautiful partner that I have now, he'd never seen that side of me with Lyme. So he's like asking me, what can I do? What can I do? I'm laying there, I can think everything, but I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed, I couldn't move. And I'm just like, call Emma, who's luckily my best friend, who saw some of the worst. And he's like, what can she do? Anyways, fast forward to what I'm saying is, there's just take away, like, I'm healed, I'm better. Because the thing is, look, you've got Lyme. It's in your story, and it's from what we're still learning the information about it. And yeah, technically I hit remission in 2 weeks, and it was terrifying to go through this thing with COVID. And oh my gosh, did I feel laying on that floor like I had this tick cap, like everything's booked and it's all going to blow up in my face and everything's going to ruin again. No, because I've now done 5 years with Lyme. It's never going to go back to as bad as it was. So no matter what, I can always say as things get bad, I can always be like, I have dealt with worse, with less understanding, less sympathy, less support. I have done and survived through way worse. And I think that's the biggest thing with Lyme is, I still remember when the reason, like coming back to when I was living in Miami, the reason I created my podcast was I'd lost my family, friends. So I was like, and I also couldn't read medical journals. I couldn't read. I couldn't like watch things. And I remember there was one documentary out, but I tried to watch it. It was too triggering to physically watch it. So I was like, I just literally need to create a podcast that is real, raw, and relatable, because I just want to hear people say, this sucks. And like, I'm in a bad mood and this sucks. I'm still fighting. I'm still positive, but this sucks. And I wanted to hear that I'm not crazy, that you're also hitting your head into a wall sometimes. And if you're not hitting your head into a wall, you're doing other things that somewhat relate to me, that I'm not a bad person. I just wanted to hear and lay in bed and be like, okay, I'm not a bad person, so I can keep going. So to, I guess, long answer your question, nothing is black and white, and you're not ever gonna be like, oh, we're good from here and everything's gonna be up. That's just not life. And that's why life is so great, is it's interesting, up and down. And Lyme taught me that at a very young age, like, you can learn to appreciate, like, yo, I can get up and go to the toilet. I don't have to pee myself right now. That's kind of cool. Also, I can hike a mountain. That's kind of cool. Also, I can relate to a person who I've never spoken to or have anything in common, and I can be like, yo, I know your fight. Awesome. Sorry, yeah, that's my long answer.
No, I mean,
I get passionate.
No, and this is great. I mean, Well, I'm still thinking about what you said probably a few minutes ago when you said you're not gonna. No, it's so powerful. You're not gonna stop growing from the experience, right? So I think that's true. That even once you feel good, you're gonna continue to learn and grow from the experience. And by coming on this podcast, networking with others, learning ways to improve your health in general, and you're gonna just keep growing throughout your life, and you're going to have ups and downs, and it's never going to be I am fully cured. And I think you explained that very brilliantly, so thank you for that. And I just want to share with our listeners, though, Georgia, that this was 7 days ago. This was exactly 1 week ago that you had COVID, and we had to postpone this podcast, and you had to go to the hospital, and you were so sick, and 7 days later, look at you today. I mean, you are, I can't even explain just how well you look. And I know it's an invisible illness, and I'm sorry to be judging you based on your appearance, but you look amazing, and you're just doing amazing on this podcast. So, and the fact that you get that PTSD, I just want our listeners to have a little bit of peace about just because you've made a lot of progress doesn't mean one setback is going to destroy you. And that's what you just described so brilliantly. So thank you for that. But let's go back to Florida. So you're in Florida. You talked about you found a really good therapist. What else happened in Florida? And then what happened next?
Oh, sorry, my dog's barking. My support dog. Well, actually, speaking of my dog speaking up, she was like, "Why haven't you spoken about me?"
It's her time to join the interview now. She wants to join because we told this is her part of the story, right, Georgia? So, what kind of dog is she?
So she's a rat terrier chihuahua, and that was actually pretty perfect timing. When I was in Miami, I started the podcast, definitely got a community, but a big game change, and this definitely is to each their own. But I'd always grown up with a dog, and especially again with the Suck It Up community, I very much 1 second.
Real good.
I hadn't Lily.
Lily is officially a part of this podcast now, George. I'm
Okay,
actually happy this happened because now she's an official part of this podcast. So thank you. That was perfect timing.
She was before humans. She was one of the first ones to save my life because basically, I guess with the Suck It Up culture, I found it very hard to. I had no desire for life anymore because at that point I didn't know what.
You were alone in Florida, right? You went there by yourself. You were alone.
Very much alone. I'm a very social person, so I'd made friends. Were they deep, real friends who knew what was happening? Absolutely not. And I'm also very open, so they knew about it. But I still, basically, Lily, my dog, I got her, and she was my purpose to not give in. I just needed something. I needed literally anything because for me, I didn't know my values, so I thought I was a crap person. My family had left me in my mind. I actually, looking back, think I isolated myself. But there were just so many things, and Lily came in. She was a big support. And then because of Lily, I actually learned how to love again and receive love in a way that I didn't have to owe her anything but just feeding her and taking her out. And that was a way for me to relearn love. And I think there is the aspect of being the athlete in there because I had never received love that was just unconditional. Unconditional love was a concept that I had never witnessed, at least felt, I guess. And so Lily taught me that. And from there, I was able to find a therapist. And I have been with this therapist now for straight 5 years. It was probably the biggest game changer in my recovery because I had someone who was just on my side no matter what. And I will say, I ended up like as privileged as I am, and this does, people find this a little tricky, but I had to do some sex work because I genuinely didn't know what else to do. I did online sex work because I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't afford anything, and it was the most logical, safest thing for me to get money when I was completely alone at the age of 20 years old. And if I'm having to do that where I'm from, like I can't, again, as I say on repeat, what the heck is happening with everyone else who doesn't have anything? Because I was getting paid to model at the time, and I still had to do the side hustle. So it's, to me, it was just shocking. But it gave me this like understanding strength. Then I was doing the podcast and being like, okay, I am valid. So I was like, no, I'm taking this. And then I had my therapist. I'm taking this to my parents. I'm taking this and I'm going to fight for these relationships. I'm not letting this thing take anything more from me. There was definitely the switch of kind of turning 22, 23 that was like, hang on, no, I'm not letting this take anything more. And COVID happened around then, and I knew enough. I wasn't speaking to my mom, barely speaking to my dad, but I sucked it up and moved into one of their places. And I've gone to therapy with both of them, with my sister now as well. And I've taken the time to understand their side as well. And I think that's a big thing. A lot of when you're in it deep, especially when you're new in it deep, it's really, at least for me, it was really hard to have empathy for my caregivers, because I'd be like, as I said at the start of this podcast, is like, why don't you see me? How do you not see me? And so I think how do I word this? Like, I just got a little sidetracked there. But speaking to the therapist, the empathy, little, if anyone can give me
and being able to see it from the viewpoint of your family members, right?
I think a really key part of it that finally switched after coming to Vermont. Also, obviously, I wasn't in toxic cities anymore, so that helped.
You left Florida and went to Vermont, right?
When COVID hit, within pretty much 48 hours, I just knew how, I think because of my experience with Lyme, I knew somehow in my gut COVID was going to be very bad. So I remember it was announced March 17th, and I basically packed up and drove, after living in Miami Beach for 2.5 years, still had 6 months on my rent. I packed up everything and left within 2 days and drove to Vermont, pretty much.
George, I just want to back up real quick before we get to the Vermont. In Florida, were you seeing any other Lyme doctors, and were you doing anything to treat Lyme beyond the therapy and just work, self work that you were doing?
I saw one doctor in Orlando once or twice, and it just wasn't, there was no way I was going to be able to support myself with that doctor, get up there. There was no way I could work. There was just no way to do the treatment.
So you were just trying to survive, and you weren't really treating yet. You were just trying to live your life and survive.
I was trying to do somewhat of juicing, yoga, all holistic. I was just keeping it on the mellow. And because I was strong enough, that's not a good word. I was egotistical enough to ignore my symptoms that Lily, that I was able to get through it, but it was hell.
So 2 years of hell in Florida. Thank God for Lily, who is now introducing herself again. So thank God for Lily in Florida, and thank God for your therapist to help you get through it. And it's important to note that before this, you had many, many failed therapists. I know from your pre-interview questionnaire, some of which you actually made you worse and made your relationships worse. So it's important to note that if you haven't gone to therapy, the first therapist you go to is not going to be some savior. Sometimes you have to go through a few to find a good one, but it's worth it. And don't give up if you can't find a good therapist. I know that's your experience as well.
Yes, I went through many, many, many different tries, and it made me lose a lot of hope. And it was really, really hard resharing my story, because I barely understood my story at the time. So it was really traumatizing being able to be that open and then just being ruined again. And like the reason I was going to therapy was I was so ruined by people not listening to me. So it was quite traumatizing, but so well worth it. And I was quite lucky. I mean, it took a couple times, but I was quite lucky, I guess, in the outcome of it. But I think reminding yourself that it's really hard to understand unless you've been through it. It's really confusing. And I tell myself that all the time.
All right, so now it's March 2020. COVID hits.
Yep.
You have the forethought to say, I'm going back to Vermont. I'm going to be with my family, right? You moved to Vermont. Oh, no, you're by yourself.
Yeah, it was just that I knew the house was open.
Okay, so this is a family house.
Yeah.
Okay, so you go to the family house in Vermont, and you get out of Florida, and now you're in Vermont. COVID hits, and I'm sure that brings an added level of stress. What are you doing? Are you treating Lyme? What's your life like at this point, and how does it change compared to how you were living in Florida?
So at this point, I'm now living in my mother's house. So I very much had to somewhat create a reconnection with her. Same as my father. I did take a pit stop in Virginia where my father was for about a month. And then I came up to Vermont because I had more of a base here. And basically I could just see that COVID was going to be a mess for a long time. So I actually chose back specifically to come back to Vermont, where a lot of the trauma happened in this house, that I was like, honestly, may as well take this time to try and reflect. At this point, I'd been pretty successful yoga instructor, so I was really looking inner and trying to evolve. So I came back to Vermont, and it was horrible. When I first came back and walked back into this house, I saw myself where I beat myself up. I saw the head holes I put in the thing that had been covered up. It was really hard, and I numbed myself for a while. And then it got quite a bit worse because the allergies heightened, and I was in a new area that triggered my Lyme, and then just the stress. And I luckily, again, was so scared. I mean, since I had to retire from skiing, I couldn't commit to it. And then New York, I couldn't commit to my jobs there. I was too scared to commit to anything. So every job I took was something a bit lower than me. So if I lost it or couldn't show up, it wasn't something that hurt my kind of sense of self, I guess. And I was a nanny, which, that being said, like, don't take anything away. That is keeping kids alive, and I love it so much, but it probably wouldn't have been my path. But I nannied, and then I basically my mom was stuck in Australia because of heightened of COVID. I had absolutely no family here, barely had a base here. I had luckily been open enough to communicate to the few people around me that I somewhat have Lyme disease, and they'd seen my online presence, so they knew it from there. But basically I started feeling really ill very suddenly, and then I was like, oh, it's got to be Lyme. Kept ignoring it. I did my yoga, I did all my holistic things that had kind of kept it maintainable enough. And then there's one day that I just fully collapsed, and apparently I'd been internally bleeding from a burst ovary cyst for 7 days. And because of my trauma from Lyme disease, going to hospitals, I just sat there and bled for 7 days in so much pain. And it didn't cross my mind to go to the hospital, because I was like, this is Lyme. It's probably another symptom that I don't know about yet. And if I go to the hospital, I'm going to be put in a psych ward. And I am now 23. So I'll be locked up in the state. Like, I will not be able to get signed out. So I sat there and just dealt with it. And then I guess I blacked out, and this person who barely knew me had to make the call to get me rushed to the hospital. But still going into the hospital, I didn't feel comfortable to say, like, I couldn't speak, because I went into the hospital. There's too much light. There's too much anything, too much everything. Everyone's asking me questions. Everyone's asking my history. And I'm like, I can't. So I laid there with my eyes closed. And I remember I literally went there. The way they took me out was I was in undies and a t-shirt, because anything that touched my body was too much. It was too much, like, on my skin, too much, like, what's the sensations or. And so I got to the hospital, and I'm laying there with my eyes closed, and I just laid there, and I was like, chronic neurological Lyme disease, chronic neurological Lyme disease. And I just repeated it nonstop, because I was like, some nurse or some doctor has got to freaking get this. And finally a nurse got it. She got everyone out of the room, turned off the lights, got me something to kind of cover my eyes a little bit, like got me those kind of fake glasses that like dim it. And I was like, and I was able to do my breathing techniques, do what I'd learned to manage it all out. And I was like, I was able to say to her, look, this is what's happening. And until that moment, like, I would have probably ended up in the psych ward if I didn't have the history of ending up in the psych ward when I was 18, and luckily 17, and luckily having my parents sign me out. But I was so scared to even open my eyes or say anything about neurological Lyme disease. Second that happened, they found I was internally bleeding, instantly rushed to hospital. But I will say, on top of that, because of the history of my health, none of my family believed that I was literally about to die from internal bleeding. They thought it was just another thing at first. So to quickly finish that off, is I was in Vermont, and I lost my father and sister through that. They just didn't want to deal with it. They were like, this is too much.
I'm sorry.
And so I had a very dark couple months, and I found, luckily, from the family I was nannying with, because I'd been so honest about my Lyme, because I'd showed up and said when I couldn't, it wouldn't be because I was hungover. It wouldn't be. And if it was because I was hungover, I'd be honest. But if I don't show up, it's normally because of Lyme. And if not, I'll be very honest why I'm not. showing up. And they found a Lyme literate doctor in Woodstock, Vermont, called Joan Randall. She's the best person ever, and she does the magnetic treatments. After that surgery, the reason I was also so scared going into that surgery was I was like, this is going to send my Lyme off charts. Like, I'm going to be screwed again. And I remember going into Joan Randall, and I was so sick of everyone, but I luckily had a somewhat community around me that cared about me at the time, that they got me there. And I literally remember, I don't, but I've been told, I sat in that doctor's thing, glasses on, bucket hat on, and she asked me one question, and I literally couldn't answer a question because I was like, I can't even try to explain what the heck is happening. I'm so tired. This is 9 years in. I'm dead. Like, I've given, at that point, I had completely given up. It was the people around me that did get me through. She got me on the table. She was like, do you trust? She asked one question, saw me sort of trigger, and she was like, just get on the table. And I was like, okay. And then she was like, this is going to hurt a lot. And she basically said, what do you use for pain? I was like, get me a towel to bite on. She brought me 3 different textures of towels. And that's when I knew, and put them up to my mouth with my eyes closed. And that's when I knew. I was like, do anything you want. You've obviously had Lyme. You've obviously been through it. You've ignored the question answering. You've given me the texture option. You get it. I was like, take it away. I did the magnet treatment. From there, like, yes, I hurt. It was hell. But however long later, that was probably that was 2021, start of 2021. And hitting August 2022, I'm pretty much about to hit remission because of Joan Randall, magnetic therapy, and just being very brutally honest about where I'm at with my Lyme with the people around me.
Georgia, tell us what this magnetic therapy is, because you said that she told you it was going to be painful and had you bite down on the towel. So I never thought about magnetic therapy as being something as painful, but I don't really fully understand it. So can you explain for our listeners and for me what it is and how it felt while receiving the treatment?
I definitely cannot do the scientific side of things, because I will say I still don't really get my brain to do that quite yet. But I can explain exactly how it felt. As we know, Lyme is a spiral bacteria. She uses a lot of kinesiology to find, I guess, where it is in your body. For me,
what does that mean, kinesiology, George? I'm sorry. Can you explain how does she use kinesiology to find it?
A lot of muscle testing. And for instance, your body knows your body knows all your trauma. And let's say you had a trauma at 2 years old and something triggers that at 42 years old, it's actually going to feel exactly how it felt at 2 years old without you really knowing it. So the body, it's really hard to lie with your actual body. And so I still go into treatments with her and I'm like, how is this happening? But it's so spot on to what I'm feeling that I'm like, I don't even question it. But basically I went in there, she literally had no history from me.
It's muscle testing kinesiology, so it's the muscle testing? Okay.
Yes. Gotcha. And she, right before she put the magnets on me the first time, this is when I'm lying there, my sunglasses on, close. I remember her picking up my feet, holding my heels, being like, I believe this really started about 14 years old. Like, it hit the points that I literally had forgotten about my own story. And it was shocking to me. And she was like, and Babesia and Bartonella are your biggest things, like some of your biggest things. It was so shocking, the sudden things she knew just from holding my feet and my energy, that I was like, I trust you, you do you. And when you asked about the pain, it only really hurt the first time for me. Again, I think I was also in a state of like completely given up, but anything that, I mean, I was so sensitive at the time that even like putting a hand on me, I probably would have reacted. So I felt though, when the magnet went on me and there were a couple, sort of the spiral, like unspiraling. So it was like, think of a wine opener and then you're unopening that. Like, it was the opposite. So it hurt, but after being in that much pain for so long, I honestly don't think it really hurt. And I don't think most Lyme patients would. I don't really want to say that big term, but I really don't. It's a hurt that is like, oh my God, thank gosh, it's working. It's a relief hurt, if that makes sense.
It doesn't. And these magnets are actually being put over certain parts of your body based on the muscle testing. and the magnetic, I guess, frequency is allowing your body to clear up these congested spaces and also helping kill the Lyme, correct? Is that how it works? I don't really
I
fully
believe
understand.
so.
Okay.
I will say I don't. She asked me multiple times, do you want to know the science behind it? I literally was so tired of all of the info. I was just like, I trust you. I'm seeing the change. You do you. Because that is how over it I was with all the facts, that I was like, I actually feel the change. Feel the change in what you're doing, that I don't really care what you're doing. Just do it and let's go.
But
And so
ultimately,
I will make sure to send you guys the links. But that shows how I was just like, this feels like it's working. Go for it.
So really, this is what helped you address the Lyme and co-infections in your body and bring you to a place of where you are today. A little over a year later, you're almost in remission. You're almost completely symptom-free at this point, right? So how amazing is that for this alternative medicine that many people don't even believe is real, but we've heard time and time again on this Tick Boot Camp podcast that it has helped people get their lives back, right? So it's just another affirmation that we're hearing here about alternative medicine and magnetic therapy and muscle testing being spot on accurate about your history and your symptoms, right? So that's another great story there for muscle testing. Now, I mean, give us an idea over the last year, where are you at now with your health? I mean, do you have any symptoms left? Are you, are you working? What are you doing now? And how do you feel?
I will say I'm doing really well. I finally have committed to a career, and actually, very ironically, it is in the ski industry. I am now coaching the kid that I used to be, basically, but a key element for me is coaching is changing, and I will not be doing the suck it up program. I'll be doing the, why are you doing this? Are you happy? Are you having fun? That's how you're going to succeed. So that is my biggest goal. I believe, and my therapist and I always say this, is I went to the College of Life, and I'm about to graduate pretty much. And I feel really stoked because for a long time it sucked to be talking about what I was talking about. And just every time people ask, what are you up to? I'm fighting Lyme disease. Instead of being like, oh, I'm at college. No, I've been fighting for my life, and I am about to graduate, and I am still alive. So I'm sorry. I think I've done some good things over the past couple, and it was a big thing to change in my head, but it was, no, I have done College of Life, and I have learned now how I see like my friends, and they get really upset by the smallest of things, or they don't appreciate the small things of being able to go to the bathroom and being able to just breathe without pain, honestly, or move. So for me, I know I've been put on this, like, I am now living day to day. I'm understanding that crap hits the walls, excuse my language, and that's okay, because that's honestly the beauty of life. And so it's learning to choose the moments of grace and appreciation, learning to be able to say, this sucks, and still keep going, because and so now I'm a coach for a bunch of kids, and I'm the only female coach on the East Coast in the US for freestyle skiing. A big element of that is I really want people to be connected with their emotions, because I think that makes you a stronger athlete in every sense. I strongly believe that my big passion is to continue sharing my Lyme story, because I happen to have no filter. I've never had a filter before Lyme. And a lot of people seem to care sometimes what they say. I don't, as long as I help other people. So that is a major thing, is just anyone who's willing to have the open conversation, be so vulnerable with them and just say, yo, it sucks. Keep going. I peed myself. I hit my head into walls. It was crazy. It sucked, but also it wasn't. It was strong. So it's just finding the balance in all of things and trying to basically get the message out of things are not black and white. And a lot of things are a choice. And it's okay that things suck and are good at the same time. You can be terrified and happy at the same time. It does not have to be either or. And it's okay to have both.
Jordan, let me ask you
That
the
answered
last
the
question
question.
we ask. Let me ask you the last question that we ask
Okay.
everyone on the Tick Boot Camp podcast. You said that you have a beautiful partner, somebody who has been very understanding of you and all of these challenges. So what if that partner came into this room right after the podcast, into your room right after the podcast, and had a tick? What would you recommend that they do so that they would not find themselves on a difficult chronic journey?
First thing I would do is I would put tea tree oil on that tick right away so it loosens off. So you do not risk leaving that head in there. That is the first. I would always have real tea tree oil on you. That is the first thing I would say, because I will never try to get a tick out, even on my dogs now, without putting some sort of peppermint oil, tea tree oil, because that loosens them up right away. And you just lose the risk. You lose a little bit more of the risk of getting the head stuck in there. That is the first step. Second step, with that tick, put it in a Ziploc, send it right off to Hygienics or whatever the different, I'm bad at brand names, but send it off to a Lyme literate lab so you can know right away. Take yourself to a doctor, say what happened, get the antibiotics if you can within those 7 days. But even on top of that, get your juices in, like green juice, water. Already preemptively get on your health. Gosh forbid you missed that tick. What I would recommend, or gosh forbid you're still trying to get diagnosed with Lyme, trust your gut. Your gut knows. Your gut knows. Give yourself a break. You're allowed to rest. It doesn't make you lazy. It doesn't make you a bad person. Rest. Give grace. Also, give grace to anyone else around you who may have to now start helping you. But to that, like, let's again to the partner, is give yourself the grace, because most likely you're not a bad person. Most likely you are probably sick. And yes, it's not an excuse. And yes, you're going to do some crap things and you still have to own up to them, because they will still hurt other people sometimes. But also give yourself the grace. I think that is the biggest thing, is if it is missed and you get diagnosed and you're having all these crazy ass symptoms that are not understood, give yourself the grace and trust yourself, because you do know. I knew when I was freaking 16, when I had no knowledge, I just didn't know how to trust myself. Trust yourself first.
Georgia Wood, thank you so much for this very deep and thoughtful conversation. You are really a wonderful guest and a wonderful podcast host. So we're really blessed to have such a brilliant storyteller join us and make my job and Matt's job so easy on this podcast. So thank you for joining us.
Sweet. Thank you so much for having me. Great conversations.
Thank you for listening to our Tick Bootcamp interview with our guest, Georgia Wood. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Georgia, please visit her on her Instagram accounts at ZestyYogiGeo and at Blooming with Lyme podcast. Second, if you've enjoyed this episode of our Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends on social media. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a Tick Bite blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at tickbootcamp.com/bite to view our blueprint. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on your podcast platform of choice. And finally, if you'd like to search our podcast library of almost 300 episodes, subscribe to our email list, or share feedback, please visit our website at tickbootcamp.com. Thank you, as always, for listening.